They don't scream, they don't break things, they just look at you with a quiet confidence that says, "You don't get to touch my peace." That silence, it's not fear, it's power, because there's a kind of strength that doesn't need an audience. It doesn't react, it doesn't explain, it doesn't beg for closure. And that's exactly what breaks the narcissist. They feed on your reaction. They wait for your anger, your explanations, your endless effort to fix something that was never your fault to begin with. But what happens when you don't give it to them? What happens when your silence is not weakness, but strategy? What if indifference is how you win? See, most people think torturing a narcissist means yelling back, exposing them, proving them wrong. But that's exactly the game they want you to play. What if the real way to disarm them was to stop playing entirely? In this episode, we're not just talking about narcissists. We're talking about freedom, about reclaiming your peace, about remembering you don't owe anyone your energy, especially not someone who thrives on draining it. Let's walk through 4 ways to break the cycle without losing your calm, without becoming what hurt you. This isn't revenge, it's liberation. Maybe it's time we said it out loud. Let's talk about that. Some people have a gift. They know exactly which words to say to make you feel guilty, exactly how to twist a look or raise a tone or go silent until you're the one apologizing for something they did. But here's the hard truth. It only works if we let it. Narcissists don't need physical power. They feed on emotional permission. They thrive in spaces where we keep explaining ourselves, justifying our reactions, trying to be the bigger person. And they count on it. They count on the fact that you'll bend again. But manipulation only works when it's not seen. Once you see it for what it is, once you call it by its name, it begins to lose its grip. That's why the first step in any kind of freedom isn't confrontation. It's recognition. You're not too sensitive. You're not overthinking. You're responding to someone who's learned how to flip your empathy into a leash. And the longer you stay confused about what's happening, the longer they stay in control. So ask yourself, do you walk away from conversations feeling drained, but unsure why? Do you keep rewriting your messages to avoid setting them off? Do you explain your boundaries and still feel like you're being unreasonable? These aren't just red flags. They're loud signals that someone else has stepped into your mental space and rearranged the furniture. But here's what Stoicism teaches us. We don't control their actions. We control the gate. That means we decide what gets in, what gets to stay, and what gets locked out. You don't have to prove anything to them. You don't have to match their energy. You don't owe them emotional access to your life. In fact, withdrawing that access, not out of revenge but out of self-respect, is one of the most powerful things you can do. Because once they realize they no longer have a seat at the table of your peace, that's when the game ends. Not with a scream, not with a fight, but with a quiet door closing and not opening again. You don't have to argue to take back your mind. You just have to stop giving them keys to the door. See, your peace doesn't get taken. It gets handed over, bit by bit. When you explain yourself too much, when you react without pause, when you let their chaos become your rhythm. Narcissists love urgency. They push buttons fast and wait for you to respond faster, because in that speed, you forget to think. You forget to choose. You become a puppet on strings they barely need to pull. But what if you didn't move? What if you paused? Even just one breath longer, one moment between what they say and what you let it mean. That's where Stoicism lives, not in cold detachment, but in the quiet split second where you remember, this is your mind. They don't live here, not unless you invite them in. Marcus Aurelius said it like this: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. It's not just a quote, it's a decision. One you make again and again, until it becomes who you are. And that's where the real power is. You don't have to make announcements. You don't have to say, I'm not engaging with you anymore. You just stop engaging. When they provoke, you observe. When they insult, you assess, not absorb. When they accuse, you delay your reply. When they twist, you stay still. This is not passivity. This is precision. And you'll notice something strange. The less you react, the louder they get, the more confused they become. Because suddenly, the system doesn't work anymore. You're not playing the role they cast you in. You're not the fixer, the explainer, the emotional sponge. You've stepped off the stage, and they don't know what to do without your script. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. It's not about winning the argument. It's about not needing to enter it at all. Your silence doesn't mean surrender. It means you've chosen to conserve your energy for things that matter. It means the storm can rage around you, but you don't invite it inside. You protect your mental space the same way you'd protect your home. Not out of fear, but because you know your peace is sacred. That's how you reclaim your mind, not by changing them, but by remembering you were never theirs to control in the first place. Narcissists don't just want control, they want a stage, a conflict, a performance. And every time you defend yourself, raise your voice, or explain your pain, you give them exactly what they're looking for: attention wrapped in emotion. You're not weak for reacting. You're human. But the moment you realize you don't have to play their game, that's the moment you start winning. Stoicism isn't about being cold. It's about being conscious, choosing your energy, your timing, your response, as if every word costs something. Because it does. Your energy is currency. Your silence is strategy. And the more you give it away to people who weaponize your reactions, the more you lose touch with the one thing that's truly yours: your presence. So what does not playing actually look like? It means you don't argue with false accusations. You don't chase closure from someone who feeds off confusion. You don't try to outsmart them, expose them, or prove who's right. You stay still, and stillness makes them panic. Why? Because stillness isn't just silence. It's power without noise. It's dignity that doesn't need an audience. Most narcissists expect the same dance. Push, you pull, blame, you defend, twist, you untangle. But when you don't move, don't chase, don't react, they're left alone with themselves. And they hate that. Because underneath the arrogance and manipulation is usually something hollow, something scared, something that can't exist without your attention. This is where Stoicism gives you an edge. It tells you, you don't need to change them. You only need to change what you reinforce. If they lie, let them. If they project, let them. If they insult, let them talk into the wind. You're not responsible for correcting every distortion. You're responsible for your peace. And sometimes choosing peace means choosing nothing. Not a reply, not a reaction, not even a look. just stillness, centered, grounded, untouchable. This doesn't mean avoiding life, it means engaging life on your terms. So the next time someone tries to bait you into a spiral, ask yourself, is this mine to carry? Or is this just noise trying to live in my head? Let it echo. Let it fade. That's what happens to echoes. They only last when something in you keeps repeating them. But you can let it go, because you've stopped playing. And without your role, their game falls apart. Being calm doesn't mean you're numb. Being strong doesn't mean you're never shaken. And being stoic doesn't mean you don't feel. You feel. You just choose how to carry it. There's a difference between shutting down and holding steady, between burying emotions and making space for them, without letting them take over. Because yes, it hurts. Walking away from someone who manipulated you, setting a boundary with a parent who never learned how to love without control, letting go of the idea that one day they'll finally understand. That's grief, not coldness, and you're allowed to grieve. In fact, Stoicism demands it because real strength isn't about avoiding pain. It's about facing it without flinching. Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." But when it comes to narcissistic relationships, we suffer both. What happened, and the story we tell ourselves about what might happen next. We imagine the next fight, the next guilt trip, the next comment that sounds caring, but cuts deep. And all of that lives in our minds, rent-free. That's why healing isn't just about cutting people off. It's about clearing out the spaces they still occupy inside you. And that takes time. It takes mourning. It takes reclaiming not just your present, but the parts of your past that were written with someone else's pen. But here's the shift. You don't need to be angry to move on. You don't need to hate them. You don't need to explain your story over and over to get validation. You just need to choose your own peace more often than you choose their chaos. You choose to write, to walk, to breathe, to sit with a friend who sees you, to talk to a therapist, not to fix yourself, but to unlearn the lies you picked up along the way. You choose to feel your feelings deeply, but not let them define you. You cry when you need to, but you don't stay in the flood. That's not weakness. That's self-respect. That's how you become unshakable. Not because life doesn't move you, but because you know how to move with it. So no, you're not cold. You're becoming warm in ways the narcissist could never be. Present, aware, grounded, not reactive, but responsive. You're learning how to live from the inside out, not according to their moods, not according to their shame or fear or guilt-tripping tactics. You're not frozen, you're focused, and that is the beginning of freedom. Not everything that wounds you deserves your explanation. Not every insult needs a reply. Not every false version of you deserves correction. There's a kind of power in restraint, a quiet, steady kind. And to the narcissist, it's unbearable. Because what they crave most isn't control, it's engagement. They don't just want to pull your strings. They want you to show up for the show. But here's what Stoicism teaches us. You can disarm someone without saying a word. Let's talk about the 3 silent weapons of a modern Stoic. Tools not for revenge, but for liberation. 1. You don't fix their version of the story. It's tempting, so tempting. When someone paints you as cold, difficult, unstable, you want to explain, to prove you're not what they say, to call up receipts, messages, the truth. But the moment you do that, you're back in the arena. fighting shadows with logic. A narcissist doesn't care about truth. They care about narrative. They weaponize misunderstanding. So the first silent weapon is this: letting their story die in the air. You don't run behind their words cleaning up the mess. You don't call mutual friends to explain. You don't repost or correct or announce. You simply live and let time do the sorting. The people meant for you will feel it. The people not won't care anyway. That kind of silence, it's deafening to those who expected you to play defense. 2, you don't warn them when you're done. The second weapon is walking away without ceremony. No grand goodbye, no final confrontation, no need to finally say everything you've been holding back. That's what they want. One last burst of energy. One last show of how much they mattered. But when you leave quietly, with clarity instead of drama, it breaks the script they've rehearsed. It says, "I've seen enough. I owe you nothing, and my peace matters more than your reaction." It's not passive. It's precise. Because when you stop warning people about your boundaries and just start living them, they have no room to argue. You don't block to send a message. You block to send silence. You don't pause the conversation. You end it. Not out of spite, out of self-respect. That's a weapon they can't fight, because it leaves no opening to push back. 3, you don't need closure to move on. The final silent weapon is this: making peace without their participation. Most people stay stuck in toxic cycles because they're waiting for clarity from the person who caused the confusion. They want closure, an apology, an admission. But narcissists don't give that. They give circular logic, blame shifting, gaslighting, or silence. And so the moment you decide you don't need them to understand for you to heal, you win. You write your own ending. You say, "I hurt. I stayed too long. I believed too much. But I choose to stop bleeding where I was never being healed." And in that moment, you become untouchable. Because there's nothing left for them to twist. You're not stuck in the loop. You've stepped out of it entirely. You see, the Stoic doesn't fight with volume. They fight with vision. They don't overpower. They outlast. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you'll ever do is choose not to react, not because you're afraid, but because you're free. That's how the narcissist loses. Not when you scream louder, but when you go quiet and never return. Healing is not about going back. It's about becoming someone new, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. You don't go back to who you were before the gaslighting, before the self-doubt, before the version of you that bent so hard just to keep the peace. That version wasn't weak, but it wasn't free. And now, you get to rebuild, but not like before. This time, with intention. 1, redefining peace. For too long, peace meant not arguing, not upsetting anyone, not rocking the boat. But now you know, real peace isn't walking on eggshells. It's walking barefoot in your own space. So ask yourself, what does peace actually feel like when no one's asking you to shrink for it? Maybe it looks like slow mornings, saying no without panic, sitting in silence without having to explain that you're okay. Rebuilding starts here, protecting your energy like it's sacred, because it is. You don't owe anyone 24/7 access to your attention, your time, your rest, your boundaries. Those are walls that guard your inner citadel now. And the people who belong in your life, they'll knock. They won't barge in. 2, setting boundaries with no apology. This isn't about building walls out of fear. It's about building doors with locks. You've learned who you become when you keep giving the benefit of the doubt, long after someone has shown you who they are. So now you don't do that. Now, when someone crosses a line, you name it. You hold it. You don't justify it. You don't need a long explanation to say, "That's not okay with me." You're allowed to protect your peace without performing pain. Third, relearning joy. Trauma teaches you to scan every moment for danger, but healing teaches you to scan again, for light. Maybe joy used to feel fake, like you were pretending, but now you're starting to feel it in new ways. Not in big parties, but in the way you breathe when the room is finally quiet. In a meal you eat slowly. In the friend who listens without fixing. Joy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the first time you sleep through the night without checking your phone for a message that never made sense. This is the new map, and you're learning to read it. 4. Choosing who gets close. You no longer chase intensity. You look for consistency. You no longer confuse butterflies with intuition. You listen to your body when it says, "This doesn't feel safe." You look for people whose presence doesn't drain you. People who don't need to win every conversation. People who don't treat your softness like a weakness. This is how you build your new world, not by finding the right person to fix the old pain, but by becoming the person who no longer tolerates that pain as normal. 5. Letting go of the hero story. You were never meant to save them. Not the narcissist, not the broken family member, not the partner who only loved you when you were useful. You are not the fixer. You are not the redeemer. You are not the emotional landfill for everyone else's projections. You are human, and you are enough. Now, instead of rescuing people, you sit with them in truth. And if they can't do the same, you let them go without guilt. That's not cold. That's clear. And maybe the best part? You're not building this life to prove anything. Not to your past, not to them, not even to yourself. You're building because you're finally free to create something that doesn't need permission to exist. Something quiet. Something true. Something that feels like home. Maybe the world will never apologize. Maybe they'll never understand what they took from you. But here's what matters now. You do. You understand what was lost and what's worth protecting from now on. You don't need revenge. You need space. And that space begins inside. So build it. Guard it. Live in it like it was always yours. Because in the end, no one can take what you refuse to surrender.